Order, order. Richard Tice to move the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I beg to move the motion that this House has considered the steel industry. Now, I just want you to imagine you're standing at a railway station in deepest rural India. You look down at the tracks on the ground and you see those immortal words, Sheffield Steel, 1895. That happened to me literally 6.5 years ago. It sent a complete shiver through my spine, a shiver of pride in what we've given to the world, what we've created, what we've achieved. 130 years those railway tracks have been there. And yet, fast forward to today, and we face what I believe is a potential catastrophe. Just take stock of where we are. I think we are within 6 to 12 months, potentially, Madam Chair, of having zero general steelmaking capacity in the United Kingdom. Just think about that. Because I fear that the blast furnaces at Scunthorpe, owned by British Steel, part of the Chinese group Jingye, are very likely to close. And that would be an absolute disaster. Steelmaking manufacturing in the United Kingdom has halved in the last 10 years or so. We would be left as a complete rump. You think about it, we'd be the only G20 nation without a blast furnace except Saudi Arabia, and the only G20 nation with no general steelmaking capacity whatsoever. I think there's a lesson in that. Maybe it's not so smart to lose all of your steelmaking capacity at a time when 71% of all steel manufactured around the world is made in blast furnaces. And even if all the electric arc furnaces that have been announced are built, which of course they won't be, even if they're all built, you'll only get to a balance in 2050 of about 50-50. The majority of all new steelmaking capacity around the world that is being built as we speak is blast furnaces. There's a reason for that. And we've got a situation here in the UK where imports of steel is soaring from the likes of China, from India, from Vietnam. Hang on, I thought we were supposed to be world leaders in steel. 66% of all steel making around the world is in nations that either have no net zero targets or that their targets are general and way, way beyond 2050. My real fear is that, given that we've now had the truth told to us, which is that electricity prices in the United Kingdom are the highest in the developed world, and the business secretary in the House of Commons the other week, he actually admitted to me that there was an issue with industrial electricity prices, that actually these electric arc furnaces that have been promised down at Port Talbot and potentially are promised in Scunthorpe if the blast furnaces close there, they actually won't be viable, Madam Chair. And if something's not viable and you're asking a firm to invest hundreds of millions of pounds in it, they're not going to build it. And that's before the National Grid informs us that, oh, in Scunthorpe, we can't get you a grid connection for the electricity that you need to run an electric arc furnace. I mean, you genuinely couldn't make some of this stuff up. So because our electricity prices are so high, these electric arc furnaces are quite likely to be less viable than the concerns about the viability of blast furnaces. Now, 5.5 years ago, I gave a press conference in Scunthorpe when I said back then that the Conservative government should not sell British Steel to the Chinese. They ignored my advice. It won't be the first time, probably not the last. But we are where we are. We face catastrophe for 3 critical reasons. The first is steel is of a strategic national interest, Madam Chair. Yeah. After food and water, steel is the 3rd most important component of a modern civilization. Without steel, you've got no internet, no cars, No buildings, no infrastructure, nothing. You're back to mud huts. I don't call that progress. It is strategically important to be able to make the strongest steel. And there's genuine concerns that if we have no blast furnaces, then we can't make primary steel. Now, some say that actually with new technology, with direct reduced iron, the strength of steel produced in electric arc furnaces may give or take equal what you can produce in blast furnaces. My point is, we can't take the risk. We must have that capacity. You might say, well, why not have a bit of each? A bit like my late grandmother, when faced with a choice of desserts, she said, well, have a little bit of each. Nothing wrong with that. But what you can't do is expose yourself to having nothing. Nothing worse if you like desserts than having no dessert at all. And I just take you back to 4 years ago. The middle of 2020, we nearly ran out of paracetamol. Pretty important. Why? Because it was all made in India. We made no paracetamol in the United Kingdom, and the sun wasn't shining in mid-2020, as we all remember. So it's all very well those who believe in free markets and globalizations to the detriment of everything saying, well, you can just buy it from elsewhere. But what happens if the sun's not shining? Some terrible event goes on in the world and we can't buy steel from elsewhere. That exposes us because actually steel is strategically important. We must be able to produce it here in the UK. The second reason, Madam Chair, why I think this is a potential catastrophe facing us is the economic interest. There's a thing called the multiplier effect. If you make and manufacture things here in the United Kingdom with our own jobs, with our own money, creating wealth, that circulates around the economy. It's what I call bubble-up economics from the lowest point. You create and make things, and the money circulates around the economy. And that is a hugely powerful thing at a time when everyone's desperately talking about the need for growth. You don't get growth, Madam Chair, if you export all of your jobs and all of your money. Yes, you might buy the good and it arrives here, but you don't benefit from the multiplier effect, and therefore you lose the power of growth. Now, some will say, well, hang on, Tata, they lost lots of money over the last 10 years or so. It's not viable. Well, let's just take a look, shall we, at their losses. Leave aside the 1 in a 100-year event of 2020. Actually, cumulatively, their losses, frankly, in the overall scheme of things, relative to that multiplier effect, a decent round of drinks is actually what it is. Give or take, let's call it 100 million a year, compared to the size of our economy and the importance of that multiplier effect. I would suggest to this House, Madam Chair, that actually it is vital that we keep steel manufacturing going in a sizable way here in the United Kingdom. Not to do so would be a self-inflicted wound. And it's a wound that is driven by the obsession that the main two political parties have with net zero. That is the reality. Net zero and the increase in renewable energy capacity is directly linked to the increase in our electricity prices. It's directly linked to the fact that we are becoming ever more uncompetitive. And the Tories started it, and now with what I call the net zero zealot-in-chief, the new Secretary of State for Energy, it's being accelerated. Well, we're promised the bills will come down. They'll never come down. But I was at an event last week with someone who's advising the World Economic Forum, the G20 nations about renewable projects. And he admitted, in a defining moment for me, that without subsidies, without government interventions, renewables cannot be viable. That means, Madam Chair, by definition, they're more expensive. Which means those of us who are obsessed with it in this country, the bills are not going to come down. And at some point, there will be a day of reckoning. The third reason why this is a catastrophe, Madam Chair, is what I call the community interest. We saw the devastation in the coal mining communities in the 1980s. When I've been campaigning, You still hear people talk about that. It was absolutely devastating. We've got the oil and gas industry under huge threat at the moment because of net zero. Again, devastating. Huge loss of the multiplier effect, skills disappearing, families concerned. And in Port Talbot and in Scunthorpe, you've got not thousands, you've got tens of thousands of jobs, directly and indirectly, dependent on this industry, which could literally disappear within 12 months. And it's not just the jobs, it's the families, the partners, the spouses, the wives, the children. You're then talking hundreds of thousands of people devastated by this. And these jobs, they are seriously well-paid jobs. The average value of a steel job is around about 50% more than the average salary in the local area. So it's all very well saying, well, we can retrain. But if you're currently earning up there, Madam Chair, and you retrain and all of a sudden you're earning down there, I don't call that progress. Yeah. I call that going backwards. And the truth is, this will have a devastating impact on these communities. And I actually feel that the unions have let their members down here. They've betrayed them. A year ago, I wanted to go and talk to over 1,000 steel workers in Port Talbot. I met a couple of brave union leaders in secret, in a quiet room, and I said to them, I want to talk to everybody and tell them about the madness of what's going on. But oh no, the union leaders banned me from talking to the steel workers to tell them the truth. And here we are today, thousands of jobs sacrificed on the altar of net zero in Port Talbot, and the risk in Scunthorpe, facing us just in front of us. Now, lots of people say, well, don't worry, Richard, we'll be a world leader in this stuff. Really? A world leader? I would suggest to you, Madam Chair, that the only thing that we are going to be a world leader in is naivety, is stupidity, is negligence. Because the truth is, behind our backs, literally these other countries that are making steel, growing their economies, cheap energy, they are laughing at us. They cannot believe how foolish we are being. They cannot believe that we're actually serious about this. We're actually serious about destroying some of our finest manufacturing industries. But they'll take it. They're benefiting. We're losing. And this is a disaster, an absolute disaster. So you might say, well, what can we do about it? I have a plan. Now, most of it is achievable by this government. The first thing is that the Business Secretary has promised us a new steel strategy next March. I happen to know that that strategy is basically drafted. It's basically written. A few I's, a few dots, dot some I's, cross some T's. I happen to believe, I've been told, that draft is very much there. The Minister indicates maybe I'm wrong. This is urgent. We can't wait 6 to 12 months. Can't run the risk of civil servants saying, I'm so sorry, we haven't got it done in March, it'll be the summer. I would urge the Minister and the team to say, let's get this out before Christmas. But my 5-point plan is, Madam Chair, firstly, we need to take a strategic stake in British Steel to guarantee that the blast furnaces in Scunthorpe will not close. We cannot run that risk. Because otherwise, if the electric arc furnaces are not built, we've got nothing. Niente. Zip. The second part of my plan, Madam Chair, is we need to scrap the carbon taxes and the potential carbon border adjustment mechanism. The third thing is that we need to stop the dumping of cheap imports from nations like China. And that requires, if necessary, the appropriate tariffs and protectionism. America's doing it to protect their own steel industry. We should do the same. Unbelievably, according to the House of Commons Library, who helpfully produced a 50-page report yesterday, they tell us that just 2 weeks ago, far from increasing tariffs, we've had to reduce tariffs on imported steel because Port Talbot's closed. You can't make this up. Seriously. Absolute insanity, Madam Chair. that we're now reducing tariffs in order to import steel. But with a bit of a long-term planning that should have happened under the Conservative government, you could have worked out that if you shut Port Talbot, you're short of rolled steel. What are we going to do about it? This is what's gone on. So that is the third part of my plan. The fourth part is buy British. British steel, it's the best steel in the world. The Secretary of State for Energy wants more and more wind turbines. But as I understand, not a single bit of British steel is used in all these turbines that all come from overseas. So maybe, if you want more turbines, some people do, some people don't, maybe make it a condition that we use British steel to grow our own economy with more jobs and more money. Those four things, plus the fifth of the steel treasury, they're all deliverable by this government. And that's what I urge the Minister to consider. The fifth thing we believe in, we think is the right thing to do. I accept that this is not going to happen. But frankly, if you want cheaper electricity, if you want to make us more competitive, the fastest way to do it is to scrap net zero. That will bring down prices, that will stop wasting tens of billions of pounds and stop blighting our countryside with pylons, thousands and thousands of them, including in my constituency. But the first four components of my five-point plan, this government can do and should do in order to protect our steel industry, which is absolutely strategically vital. Not to do so, Madam Chair, I believe, is negligent, frankly, to the point of criminality. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I remind members that they should bob if they wish to be called. The question is, this House has considered the steel industry. Jessica Morden.
Thank you very much, Mrs Harris, and as always, a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I declare an interest as a member of Community Union and GMB Union and chair of the Community Parliamentary Group. Can I congratulate the Honourable Member for Boston Skegness for securing what I think is the first debate on steel in this Parliament, and we've had many debates on steel during the Parliaments in which I've been here. And of course, I agree that steel is the steel industry is of the utmost strategic importance to this country, to our economy, to our security, and we must cherish it. And it's absolutely vital that we protect it. I would draw his attention to the fact that there is a very active all-party steel group here in this place, which has been fighting for many years for our steel industry. And I do hope the Honourable Member will take an interest in that group and play a constructive part in it in the months ahead. I chose to do my first question to the Prime Minister of this Parliament on steel and the need for this new government, who I know is very serious about steel, and we have inherited a very difficult situation to work in, but I use that Prime Minister's question to ask the Prime Minister to work in partnership with both businesses and the trade unions to secure a transition that's right for the workforce and delivers economic growth. Because of our past in Wales, we know well that deindustrialisation can be devastating to our communities. And in his reply to me, the Prime Minister did confirm he understands we need our steel in this country, that we need our steel made in this country, and we are going to need more, not less. We need steel because we need steel to deliver our green infrastructure. And it's the duty of the government to ensure that jobs, that communities and people are not ignored in the transition. And I look forward very much to working with... Give way, indeed.
Alex Ballinger.
Thank you to my honourable member for giving way, and thank you to the member for Boston and Skegness for calling this important debate. I just wanted to note that the West Midlands region is the third largest region for the steel industry, and there are 5,000 jobs generated in this region. My Black Country constituency of Hales Owen, many of the jobs working in the steel sector there, including at Crosby Forge, which I was lucky enough to visit a few months ago. Whilst I support the green transition, does the honourable member agree that decisions need to consider what is right for the workforce in the steel industry, and any decision should safeguard the future of the steel industry in the West Midlands?
Jessica Morden.
That intervention, and the steel industry is very important for many of our communities, and as we know, jobs in the steel industry pay you know, on average, more in communities that really need them, like mine in South Wales and my honourable friends. And I do agree that it should be a fair and just transition for our communities and downstream industries which are dependent on it. And I look forward very much to working with the new Steel Minister on this, and with the steel unions, who actually do stand up very strongly for their workforce, the community, for GMB, for Unite, and have worked incredibly hard for their members and really understand the value of those jobs, and the UK Steel, the trade body, as well. For us in Wales, and clearly in Scunthorpe too, it's been an extremely challenging time for the steel industry. The deal for Port Talbot, inherited from the last government, means support for the new electric arc furnace to secure the long-term future, but with the blast furnaces obviously now closed, means heavy job losses. The new government's deal is better, I believe, than the plan announced in September 23 by the last government, and sees improved redundancy packages, training, and more commitment on investment. If the government had been able, this government had been able to start negotiations just a year earlier, I have no doubt they would have been able to get an even better deal. And over the last 14 years, whilst honourable members representing steel communities, including my honourable friend for Aberavon, my steg, have been fighting hard in here for investment and for an industrial strategy for a fair transition, even any kind of plan from the party opposite. But we were fighting a government who had no industrial strategies, just occasional stick-in-plaster solutions and a revolving door in a department which saw 12 steel ministers come and go. It was a dereliction of duty, and it left the steel industry in an extremely perilous position, and it was woeful neglect. I am pleased that this government acknowledged the scale of the challenge. On this side of the House, we've never believed that decline is inevitable. We want to see an industry not just adapt, but thrive. And I welcome the Secretary of State's announcement there's to be a steel strategy in the spring, and I look forward to honourable members being part of that, and to the government giving us a long-term plan, something we have desperately needed. I'm proud to represent Llanwern Steelworks and have been the constituency MP for almost 20 years. And I really pay tribute to the workforce, who have been through phenomenally difficult times, but are passionate and committed to what they do, including the trade union reps in that plant. We produce world-class products in Llanwern. Our automotive steel is fantastic, and the commitment secured in the new government's deal with Tata for investment in Llanwern will keep the site, hopefully, and its world-class workforce at the cutting edge of steel making. Llanwern is a living example of the potential that investment and innovation can bring to our industrial heartlands, having a new output record in recent months of 14 kilotons in a week, following the introduction of new technology on the Zodiac galvanising line. To the asks, the UK steelmakers need competitive electricity prices, paying 50% more than competitors in France and Germany, and this said this many, many times in steel debates over the years, adding 37 million to UK steel electricity costs. So can the Minister address this in her closing remarks, not least committing to track the disparity between countries? Addressing the issue of the UK carbon border adjustment mechanism, the ask by UK Steel to move forward the implementation in line with the EU, or implementing this in 2026, lest we see displaced steel from the EU flooding into the UK. With steel safeguards expiring in 2026, work with the industry to address the issue of global overcapacity. With this year alone, China is expected to export 100 million tonnes of steel, the entirety of the UK steel supply for 13 years. This is a significant threat which has the potential to impact on any government support for the industry elsewhere. And of course, procurement, which I hope will be at the very heart of steel strategy. This government's ambitions for house building, for new energy projects, for wind turbines, offshore, onshore wind. We're going to need lots and lots of steel, and let's make sure that it's UK steel. Steel is absolutely vital for any climate solution, and steel workers themselves accept the need to decarbonise, but they need a partnering government committed to a just transition. And I know with this steel minister, we can all work together to ensure that.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Good to see you in the chair, and I congratulate the member for Boston and Skegness in securing this timely debate. Part of the British Steel site in Scunthorpe falls in my Brigg and Immingham constituency, so needless to say I would take a very keen interest in its future. The site at Scunthorpe is known across the country and further afield for the steel that it produces. It is top quality virgin steel which is made from raw materials. This method of production results in a product that goes into such as rail track and tyre wire, all the way to cruise ships. The shard, British steel, can be found all over the world, and steel makers make this world-class product, and they are understandably proud of the skills that they possess. There is widespread agreement, indeed cross-party agreement, that steel is incredibly important for everything that we do, from defence to the growth sector that the previous speaker mentioned. If anything defines a core industry, one of genuine strategic importance, it must be steel. Workers and their families from across my constituency and the wider northern Lincolnshire area are incredibly concerned. They've heard rumours and seen press reports in recent weeks suggesting that an early end to the imports of coke, the imminent closure of blast furnaces, and escalating plans to import steel from the other side of the world to replace products that they are making. Understandably, they want to know once and for all if the rumours are true, and they want certainty on whether the plans to keep the blast furnaces running, at least until the electric arc furnaces are fully operational, does that still stand or not? Prior to the last election, Labour candidates stood on a platform of support for the UK steel industry. Billions of pounds were pledged. Residents in my constituency have not forgotten what they were told, and they want to know where those billions are going, and they want to see them spent in Scunthorpe. So will the Minister take the opportunity today to level with workers at Scunthorpe and set out exactly what this government's intentions are? Does the government want to keep a domestic steel industry, and so many other countries across the world are doing, or don't they? The absolute least the workforce at Scunthorpe deserve is for the government to be completely frank with them on this issue. Do the government value the work that steelmakers in Scunthorpe, and do they value the strategic capability of our nation to make our own steel? And do they want to keep domestic steel production for use in infrastructure and defence? And how and when are they going to secure that? If they can't answer yes to those questions, then can they explain what is so exceptional about the UK that means we can't aspire to maintain a steel industry? The reality is that to maintain a steel industry will always demand support from the public purse. And without a steel industry, we are in effect admitting that we no longer aspire to be a major manufacturing nation and accept that we do not value the defence industry. There are those that like to criticise the efforts of the former government in discussions on steel, and whilst I don't want to spend the short time I have on political point scoring, I do think it's worth setting out some of the realities. The Conservative government extended trade tariffs on steel products twice in the last Parliament. They did this having listened to MPs and businesses. It is a fact that they brought forward measures to help energy costs, and it is a fact that they paid the workers' wages in Scunthorpe for many months to maintain those jobs and skills and the site itself during the sale of the business 5 years ago. These were tangible, proactive decisions made by a government that understood the importance of steel to our nation. The former member for Scunthorpe, Holly Mumbycroft, mentioned steel over 200 times in questions and debates during her time in this House. I recognise that the current member for Scunthorpe is a government minister, meaning I presume that he supports their policies in relation to the steel industry. If his mailbag is anything similar to mine, he will know the scale of anxiety across the whole area. Just last week, he was calling for a deal in Scunthorpe similar to one in South Wales, where thousands of workers are set to lose their jobs. I want to see a policy that supports jobs, produces top-quality steel, and supports the whole supply chain that Scunthorpe relies on. Under the last Labour government, steel production and steel jobs halved in the UK. Can the Minister assure workers in the Scunthorpe that the current Labour government does not intend to repeat that legacy? I do understand that the Minister is in current negotiations and will not be able to share all of the details of those discussions. If this is the case, can she at least give workers some clarity on when she expects there can be an announcement on the future of the site? And can she also reassure residents that she is working with North Links Council leader Rob Waltham, who proactively travelled to China a few weeks ago to meet in person with the owners? He is taking a front and centre role in putting together a master plan for the site to ensure that jobs and opportunities are brought to the area. He must be fully supported by the government in this work. And can the Minister confirm that that support will indeed be offered? I'm conscious that there are those who will challenge the view that blast furnace steel making should not be allowed to continue on environmental grounds, but it's quite clear that ending the production of virgin steel in the UK and then importing virgin steel from abroad would simply be offshoring our own emissions and adding to the emissions of shipping that transports the steel to the UK. We should certainly not be considering patting ourselves on the back for making environmental improvements if the government's plan is simply to allow the same or worse levels of emissions to be created elsewhere and for the steel then to be brought to the UK on diesel ships in a happily good way.
I mean, does he agree with me that if we're going to go down this road of net zero madness and make our steel more expensive, that we should ban steel products and steel coming from other countries that may be made in blast furnaces?
Well, there's certainly a case for the point that the honourable member makes. I would gently point out, though, that net zero is actually also crucial to the economy of northern Lincolnshire, where I represent, with the net zero Humber project and similar schemes. I think the chairman is sort of urging me to come to a conclusion, so I'll miss the next 2 or 3 pages out, chairman. And what I will say, though, is whatever deal is reached now in this government is in this government's hands. This is an industry that, if lost, will be lost forever. So that I call on the Minister to redouble her efforts to secure both the future of steel making in Scunthorpe and elsewhere throughout the country. It's hard to exaggerate how crucial this is to Scunthorpe, to northern Lincolnshire, and indeed to the UK as a whole. We must bring this to a conclusion speedily to avoid the anxiety that the workers there are experiencing at present. Thank you.
Donald.
Thank you, Mrs Harris. It's a pleasure, as always, to serve under your chairmanship. And I'd like to congratulate the member for Boston and Skegness on securing this debate. And also, as many members will know, I have a background in the steel industry, and so rather than recite all of my interests, I'd simply ask to refer you to the members' register. I listened very carefully to the speech from the member from Boston and Skegness. And there are a few points of difference there that I'll come on to talk about, but actually there was much on which we agree, and so I look forward to he and his colleagues coming forward and supporting the government's steel strategy in due course. But if we turn first, I think, to the position in which we find ourselves in the steel industry, the government has an unenviable task as a result of the legacy that we've been left by the previous government. And I listened to the words of the member from Cleethorpes, where he talked about changes to tariffs the previous government made. They did make those changes to tariffs, but they stuck rigidly to a suite of policies that denied the possibility of private sector capital investment coming into the steel industry in the UK by making that unviable. And I know that well from the international investors I work with in the industry who were very keen to invest in the UK, but we could never get an appropriate rate of return directly as a result of policies pursued by that government. And they knew this well. I mean, they knew this at the time that the Redcar blast furnace closed in 2015, where they stood back and let it fail for the want of the purchase of some coal. At the time, it was the most productive and efficient blast furnace in Europe. The member for Cleethorpes referenced Scunthorpe. Prior to 2020, the Conservative government poured £1 billion into Scunthorpe, but didn't use any of that money to make an investment in transitioning to new technology that would have actually created a great future for people in Scunthorpe and a return for the taxpayer too, and then instead sold the plant off cheaply. And so I do not envy the position of my honourable and right honourable colleagues who are in the Department for Business, who are wrestling with this legacy, but essentially they're putting out the fires of the previous government, and we will see when the steel strategy has been brought forward how we can create a bright future for the industry. And we do need to do that, and I support the calls to do that. But I think the challenge around that is not actually a challenge around adherence to net zero. It's about a challenge around adherence to a different ideology that we've had in the UK, which has been to assume that the steel industry operates in a free market and we can treat it as such. It does not. Other countries around the world support their steel industry, and so we need to create a level playing field for investment in our steel industry too. And if we do that, then we can attract billions of pounds of private sector investment into our industry, as are the countries such as Austria, Sweden, Germany, France, and so on. And over the last 10 years, we've seen the UK steel industry collapse to the same size of the steel industry of Belgium. And I say, surely, in the UK, we have an ambition to at least be as good as Belgium, to at least have a steel industry that can serve us as well as the Belgian steel industry can serve the country of Belgium too. And of course, we can do that. So we can compete globally and we can create the products that we need as well for our green transition. The previous government knew this quite well. You can find a report on the government website from 2017 that I co-authored around competence and capabilities. It identified gaps in plate steels for offshore wind, seamless tubes for nuclear power, and in other areas as well. And they made no effort to fill those gaps because, of course, they turned their back on the private sector investment. So I think it is important that the steel strategy is brought forward, that it's brought forward in a way that will attract the private sector investment, and a way that will enable us to accelerate the green transition of our steel industry as well, because here I come to the point of difference with colleagues opposite. The green transition is not an ideology, it's an economic imperative. We need to move away from blast furnaces because they are unproductive as compared with the latest steel technologies. Steel plants operating electric arc furnaces are 5 times more productive than those operating blast furnaces. And more than this, the UK is, well, he chunters about it, but the most productive steel plant in the world is based in the USA. It's entirely privately funded. It produces the same quality of steel as Port Talbot to the same quantity, with 1/5 of the workforce, because it is automated and it uses electric arc furnaces. If we get energy prices right, we can make that investment here, and we can produce those steels too. The UK is the second largest exporter of scrap in the world. That is a valuable natural resource that we could use in the UK. But we do need primary steel making, and we need primary steel making using the most efficient technologies. And I'm afraid, for those people who are adherents to the blast furnace technology, it is not the blast furnace. So I look forward to my honourable friend bringing forward the steel strategy. I look forward to supporting it and continuing to debate it, and look forward to a bright future for steel in the UK.
Lee Anderson.
Madam Chair, it is indeed a pleasure to serve under you, and I want to just thank the honourable member for Skegness and Boston for securing this debate and making what I think is probably the best speech so far of this Parliament. Absolutely fantastic. I know the members opposite harping on about this steel strategy, and I can assure you now that the steel workers will be frightened to death of this strategy coming up, because it's going to cost jobs, and I think that it's going to destroy our steel industry and our communities. I fear this steel strategy. In the 19th century, this great country of ours was the world leader in steel production. Over 40% of the world's steel was made here, right in this country. I don't live a million miles away from Sheffield, 15 minutes up the road, not far away from Scunny. That's not far away. These were great towns, great industrial towns that drove our economy, that provided hundreds of thousands of jobs, and jobs in the wider community as well, and built up communities. And it is a shame the Labour Party, the Labour government, seem intent on destroying even more of these communities. Just a few we've got left in this country, they seem intent. Our country, as you know, Madam Chair, was built on coal and steel. Throughout the Midlands and the North, we drove the Industrial Revolution. We used to export steel. We'd export coal. And now what are we doing? We've gone backwards in this country. China's making over 1 billion tonnes of steel a year. We're making about 5.6 million tonnes of steel. China, by the way, are world leaders in renewables, yet they're still opening coal-fired power stations in order to make steel, which they can export all around the world. And we are actually, if you think about it, carbon emission NIMBYs. We're quite happy to import steel and products made from steel from 60 or 70 countries around the world that have been made with blast furnaces, but we're saying we can't do it here. I think that's hypocrisy of the highest level. And You know, I've got a lot of friends who work in the steel industry, and they've seen a real downturn at the moment. They're struggling. They're struggling to pay the bills. They're struggling to make their business work. This industry is in a terminal decline, I fear. The collapse of the Port Talbot Steelworks means that now we're the only advanced nation in the world that cannot make our own virgin steel. It's absolutely ridiculous. You know, we've got Russia at war with Ukraine. We're living in uncertain times. You know, we've seen the problems we've had over the past few years in the last Parliament with energy supply, our dependency on foreign states for energy. And now we're doing more of the same with our steel. It's just beyond comprehension. It's absolute madness. We're killing off our steel communities, just like we did the coal mining communities back in the 80s. I know, I was there. I've seen the impact he had. It's still got devastating impact or consequences 30, 40 years later. These communities were killed off. They're still struggling. I live there. I see it day in, day out. Yet we're going to get more of the same from this government. Look at the coal mine in Cumbria. What we want to open, what we should open, to produce metallurgical coal, which will then help in the production of steel, which we could blend and use in blast furnaces in this country. Yet we seem reluctant. This is a coal mine, Madam Chair, that would produce millions of tonnes of metallurgical coal. It would provide 500 to 600 well-paid jobs in an area that needs jobs and more jobs in the wider community. Yet we're quite prepared to import 3 or 4 million tonnes of coal a year into this country rather than produce it, use it in this country and hopefully export some of the coal as well. It's absolutely madness. And we talk, the Honourable Member for Boston and Skegness spoke about the high electricity charges, which will mean high production costs for making steel. Look at Drax Power Station, North Yorkshire. The electricity prices coming from there are astronomical. This is a power station that burns wood. It used to burn coal from a coal mine just a few miles down the road. But we had this great idea in this country to import wood from trees chopped down in North America and stick them onto diesel-guzzling cargo ships, send them over the Atlantic, and then set fire to them in a power station in North Yorkshire. It's absolute madness, and this will drive up the price of electricity and subsequently drive up the price of steel production. You know, it is beyond madness. China's getting it right. China's getting it right. They're world leaders in renewables, but they're also making steel from blast furnaces. You know, I think China's right. We should be actually copying China with this so-called steel strategy. They seem to have got it right. Now, I agree with the honourable members for Boston and Skegness, his 5-point plan, but I feel that it will probably fall on deaf ears. The madness will continue. You know, steelworks will continue to close down. We'll continue to lose jobs. We'll continue to destroy communities in our great country, and we'll continue. Do you want to intervene? Okay. Sorry, Chair. And again, like I say, I'm going to wind up now because I'm quite angry with the madness of this place that we work in. When there's families out there, there's communities that are relying on us to save their jobs. And they all sit there, Madam Chair, with glazed expressions on their faces. And I tell you what, come the next election, people in these communities will boot you all out. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is indeed a pleasure to serve under your chairship. It seems like only a few minutes ago that yesterday you were chairing the last debate in Westminster Hall, and here you are, still here. Well, so I commend you, Madam Chair, and on your perseverance, and obviously the fact that you don't have to get any sleep at all and still look fresh and well. Well done. Can I just say, first of all, a big thank you to the member for Boston and Skegness for leading today's debate. He set the scene, as he always does, to be fair, in a very admirable way, underlined the concerns that he has, and to be fair, that many of us share in this chamber as well. And there's no doubt that this is an incredibly important debate, not just for myself but for others, and to discuss these matters. Looking at the steel industry over the years, steel industry within the UK dates back as far as the 17th century when steel production was initially established. Steel was traditionally used for larger projects like the bridge building, weight-bearing items like rail tracks. I think the Honourable Member in his introduction referred to the trains and rails in India. In 2020, Madam Chair, steel contributed some £2 billion to our economy and was responsible for 0.1% of the total UK economic output. And if we jump forward to 2023, just a year ago, the latest report showed that UK steel production and demand plummeted to new historic lows of 7.6 million tonnes, which falls well below the levels seen at the peak of the pandemic in 2020. Unfortunately, quite discouraging, Madam Chair, and indeed factually as well. I should have said, and I apologise for not doing so, it's nice to see the Minister in her place. I wish her well. She has dual responsibilities, she was telling me earlier on in our conversation on the way down to the hall, and looking very much forward to her response to our inquiries to try. Everybody's wish in this chamber today is to see the steel industry secured. Also, just also very nice to see the Shadow Minister in his place. Look forward to his very constructive contribution as well. Very happy to give way.
Gregory Campbell.
Thank the Honourable Member for giving way. Just in the tone that he's adopting, on a positive tone and maybe in a more light-hearted sense, would he agree with me that there was a man yesterday who showed considerable backbone of real steel, and that was Michael O'Neill, the Northern Ireland manager, who picked a team of under-21s and thrashed Bulgaria 5-0. That's real backbone of steel, and we need to see some positive results like that as a result of today's debate.
Shannon.
I'm sure the Minister's got many football skills. The only thing is, last night that one of the players scored a hat-trick. That was the young fellow Price. Yes, it was an admirable victory. And if everyone showed that backbone and that strength of character, certainly we would be in a better place. Thank the Honourable Member for that. I know it's a moving away completely from the subject matter, but nonetheless reinforces the point to be made. In addition, Northern Ireland plays an important role in the success of the UK steel industry, which back in 2022 was under attack by the damages of the Northern Ireland Protocol and the outbreak of war in Ukraine. It was said at that time, Madam Chair, that steel exports could face up to 25% tax and tariffs for Northern Ireland, but it's good to be able to report here today that there has since been addressed by the Windsor Framework. So that's one of the positives that came out of that process. I have to say I wish there was more, but that was one. What springs to mind, Madam Chair, is the 1,100 steel businesses across all parts of the United Kingdom and the 33,400 jobs that hinge on that. Can't ignore those, they're so important. We've seen very recently the threats to job security due to decisions to close production in certain steel industries. Only 2 weeks ago, the UK's biggest steelworks, Tata, shut down its blast furnace 4, which was the final furnace operating at the steel plant in Port Talbot. This resulted in 2,800 job losses across South Wales, and not to mention that Port Talbot was pivotal to steel construction in Northern Ireland. The imports, that's why when we have debates on steel, you don't necessarily, Madam Chair, have to have a manufacturing base in your concern to see the benefits. The benefits for us in Northern Ireland were quite clear. The steel that was produced there came from Port Talbot to Northern Ireland. The member for Boston and Skegness has rightly so raised concerns surrounding the impact that our net zero advancements could possibly have on the steel sector. It is crucial that we get this correct whilst ensuring a proper balance. Our defence industry, Madam Chair, relies heavily on domestic, homegrown steel to build tanks and warships. This does raise issues surrounding us potentially relying too much on foreign imports. The Honourable Gentleman in his introduction referred to that. I don't think we can ignore those things when our focus should be on providing incentives to the fantastic local companies we already have to be at the front and centre of the UK steel sector successes. Fact of the matter is, Madam Chair, is that if we don't modernise to advance our steel industry without properly taking care of it, then we have to get it all right together. We must also be able to source out steel locally, to which doing so is of major importance for so many other industries across the United Kingdom, such as aerospace and defence to boats and other transport. So us in Northern Ireland, the aerospace sector is very important. I want to ask, Minister, if you don't mind me, I know the debate's not about this, but it's an opportunity. I had hoped perhaps to get this question asked in defence questions on Monday, and it was to do with Harlan and Wolf. Could the Minister, if possible, give us some update for us who are Northern Ireland members and where we are with Harlan and Wolf? Because Harlan and Wolf, and I know in my discussion with the Minister in the defence questions on Monday, he says, Jim, ask this question and I'll be happy to come back with an answer. It's really important for the jobs, number one, but also for that connectivity that we have all parts of the United Kingdom coming together. The issue of defence and aerospace are important for us for the manufacturing base in Northern Ireland, but also for that continuation of how we work better together. So I support our steel system, Madam Chair. I want the best for it. We all want the best for it, and I know that. And I also hear and respect the concerns of members for its future. And there's no doubt at all that more needs to be done to preserve and also to protect it. In conclusion, Madam Chair, society will progress and changes will be made. But it is important that we remember the benefits of our steel sector has on the United Kingdom economy, and moreover, the jobs it provides for my constituents of Strangford and further afield in all areas of this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So I sincerely look forward to hearing from the Minister and assessing what steps our government will take to preserve our steel sector, and have hope, and much hope, that this will allow for all of our nations to play their part together. Thank you so much.
Lib Dem spokesperson Clive Jones.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Caroline, and I congratulate the honourable member for Boston and Skegness for securing this debate. It's also a pleasure to be speaking for the first time in my capacity as a Lib Dem front bench spokesman. Steelmaking is of vital strategic importance to the UK. We need to build the crucial infrastructure required to generate sustainable growth and to safeguard our national security. National security that must be important to all of us who are in this chamber today. While the Liberal Democrats welcome the news that new technologies will see carbon emissions from steel making in Britain fall, the neglect of the steel industry in recent years is just another part of the previous Conservative government's disastrous legacy. This government finally needs to move from a patchwork of last-minute rescues to a long-term plan that will set the steel industry on a sustainable footing. It illustrates that we desperately need a real industrial strategy with a proper plan for steel within it. And while I welcome the government's green paper that was published earlier this week, with the hope that it will provide our business community with much needed certainty in the 8 sectors that the government have highlighted as being growth drivers, the absence of the word steel is strikingly apparent. We accept the need to move towards less carbon-intensive modes of production, but it is absolutely vital that any job losses are mitigated by reskilling, retraining, and by new green investment. We must be certain that this investment in skills and regeneration is properly targeted to where it can have the greatest impact on communities currently relying heavily on steel production. With 2,800 jobs set to be lost, the government needs to take action as soon as possible to bring certainty for those who work at the steelworks. So I would ask the Minister, what is their department doing to ensure that job losses are mitigated? And how will the steel strategy set to be published next year link to an industrial strategy? Thank you.
Shadow Minister Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mrs Harris. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd like to thank and congratulate the Honourable Member for Boston and Skegness for securing this debate in Westminster Hall this morning, and to everybody who has contributed to the debate, particularly the Honourable Member for East Londonderry, whose intervention I think will potentially go down in history as one of the most innovative ways to get into a debate on steel, particularly my honourable friend for Brigg and Immingham for his superb contribution to the debate. Just a few weeks ago, I challenged the Minister in the chamber of the House of Commons on the government's approach, not just to Port Talbot, but to the UK's entire steel industry. Yet just a couple of weeks later, we are on the cusp of Scunthorpe Steelworks potentially closing completely by Christmas, despite a clear ask to the government being made by the owner to safeguard what amounts to thousands of jobs and a vital economic security component. Because the risk, as has been mentioned already in this debate, if we let Scunthorpe close on top of Port Talbot, is that we will become dependent on cheap imports, particularly from China. And whilst I understand, Mrs Harris, that the Chancellor and Prime Minister have had some issues understanding their own manifesto commitments of late, surely the government cannot possibly have dropped their clear commitment to steel in their manifesto. Surely not, when 90% of Network Rail steel is sourced from Scunthorpe. Surely not, when Liberty and British Steel have a combined workforce of over 3,500 highly skilled jobs at Scunthorpe. They are dependent on that commitment the now party of government made in their manifesto. And it's my understanding, Mrs Harris, that the government's talks with the owners have already stalled and broken down. Not the best start for the Secretary of State or the Minister, who I remind honourable members, the Secretary of State said less than a year ago, when in opposition, that the drive for green steel must mean more jobs, not fewer. What do we see the reality on the ground today? Fewer jobs in steel in our country. The Minister will know that Scunthorpe is now the only site in the UK with the ability to produce virgin steel, and that if the Minister allows it to close on her watch, we will be left open and vulnerable to cheap imports from China, and that must not be allowed to happen. Equally, my understanding is that the government is not prepared to support virgin steel manufacturing whilst new electric arc furnaces are commissioned and come online. So can the Minister tell the House if this is correct? And if so, how this chimes with the Secretary of State's previous commitments that decarbonisation must not mean de-industrialisation. With the import of coking coal due to end this month, and the possible closure of the plant completely by Christmas in Scunthorpe, meaning thousands of job losses, time is running out, and the government simply must get a grip of the situation in Scunthorpe. The loss of this vital industrial and economic asset will result in 5,000 job losses across the supply chain and the end to steel production for the first time since the start of the Industrial Revolution. Given the choice in front of them, the government must take responsibility, not just for this, but for the downstream impact on our shipbuilding industry, the defence sector, and indeed, as the Honourable Member for Boston and Skegness made quite eloquently, the production of wind turbines that the government, on the other hand, is equally encouraging. In fact, one of their first acts was to end the ban on onshore wind, so they can't have it both ways. If they want to have their cake and eat it, they need to support the steel sector. We have already seen this government let Harland and Wolff down. Are they going to do the same with the whole steel sector? The government's plan? Well, it seems to be divert imports of steel from China through Brazil to give the impression that this is somehow an innovative solution. I'm afraid, Mrs Harris, there is nothing innovative about this Labour government's approach, masking their failure to secure a future for our steelworkers and for our economy as a whole, at the same time risking our national security in the face of those growing threats from, among others, China itself. Well, I'm not quite a minister yet, but I will give way.
On this side. Can I say to the Shadow Minister, the Shadow Minister mentioned about taking responsibility. Would the Shadow Minister take responsibility for the fact that for 14 years we had no industrial strategy, no steel strategy, endless steel ministers, which honourable members on this side of the House just begged to have any kind of strategy for steel, and therefore the situation that this government has inherited just a few months in is the responsibility of the government before.
Reg Smith.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her intervention, but as my honourable friend for Brigg and Immingham set out in his own speech, the last Conservative government actually took many concrete steps to support our steel sector. But I would gently remind members on the other side, on the government side of the chamber, and there's no sugarcoating it from my side, they won the election. They are responsible now. They have actually got to take the decisions for the future of steel, and it's no good constantly coming back and trying to make the political point scoring that we've seen time and time again in the chamber. The other side are in charge now. They can make the decisions, and if they want to stand, if the Honourable Lady wants to stand at the dispatch box in a few moments and make those commitments to virgin steel, make those commitments to steel production in this country, make those commitments to Scunthorpe and Port Talbot, then actually that will be welcomed by all sides of the House, because I think all sides of the House do want to see the future of steel secured in this country. But what we're seeing on the ground right now is something very, very different, because we've seemed to return to the Labour Party playbook. Scrap jobs, scrap production, become reliant on higher polluting countries for imports. That is not, Mrs Harris, what I call decarbonisation. So can I ask the Minister to come clean? What's gone wrong so early in her government's tenure? Why is she and the Secretary of State unable to fulfil their manifesto commitments? And can she explain what will happen to those thousands of jobs across our country in the steel sector? We do need that steel strategy now, not some promise of it in the future. Time, Mrs Harris, is running out.
Minister Sarah Jones.
Thank you, Mrs Harris. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I want to congratulate the Honourable Member for Boston and Skegness for securing this debate today. It is a very important debate, and one that I am glad that we are having. Can I just be clear at the outset that the new government was elected on a mandate to invest in the UK steel industry, to turn around its decline, and that is exactly what we will do. As has been echoed by members across the House, the UK has always been a proud steelmaking nation with a rich heritage stretching back to the Industrial Revolution. My granddad worked in the tin plate factory fed by the steelworks of Port Talbot, and I think most of us in this place have connections one way or another to steel manufacturing. And yet, as has been said, for many years steel has been a neglected industry, with crude steel production declining by more than 50% in the last decade alone. And of course, this decline was brought into sharp focus when it was announced under the last government that the blast furnaces would be closed at Port Talbot. This government does not believe that decline is inevitable. The decline we've seen in recent years has been the lack of any care from previous governments. Previous government did the bare minimum, and only when it was too late. We saw the insolvency of SSI Steelworks in Redcar in 2015. We saw the insolvency of British Steel in Scunthorpe in 2019. And we've seen how close Tata came to closing their UK steel operations. This was a pathway which risks jobs and emissions being offshored for the long term, and risks making us heavily dependent on steel imports for our vital infrastructure, energy and manufacturing sectors. This government is taking a very different approach. This week we launched a green paper on our industrial strategy. For this to have the greatest impact, we must be clear-eyed about the sectors which offer the highest growth opportunity for the economy and for businesses. But steel is a foundational industry to practically every other important industry, from energy to infrastructure. And we know it is a vital component to our economy and to our ambitions for growth. That's why We also need our own steel strategy to determine the best steps forward to rebuild this hugely important industry. We need to lay out long-term policies and plans so that the UK steel industry is not left behind as the world decarbonises. And so, as announced last month, this government will bring forward a new steel strategy next spring. Now, I hear the House's impatience for that strategy, and I understand that impatience. It has been a very long time of decline, and we need to turn it around. But given the investment of £2.5 billion that we have committed to this strategy, I think it is right that we do talk to the experts, talk to our politicians around the country, and all of those politicians who, in particular, who have steel in their areas, and develop. Yes, I will give way.
James McMurdo.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to my honourable friend for securing this debate. If I may, I'd just like to read a message that I received from someone I know personally. This Westminster Hall debate is infuriating. Talk is cheap. And the reason I want to highlight that to everyone is we all seem to agree. We all seem to agree on how important the steel industry is. So I thank you very much for giving way, and I do acknowledge the past and that not all of that lies squarely on your shoulders. Could I please ask you to include in your statement what steps the next government will be taking to secure our future? Because, as the honourable member very eloquently put, there are technological advantages to the more advanced technologies, but as was very clearly laid out by my honourable friend, there are practical issues as to why they may not be reality. And that is what we need to deal with. We need to deal with the reality. So we all seem to accept and agree.
Can I remind members that interventions are meant to be short and to the point?
Apologies.
Thank you.
We all agree that this is vital. Will you please lay out how it will become practical?
And I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention and for reading out a message from somebody who's watching the debate. I think we all agree that it's time for action, and that is exactly what this government is seeking to do. And I will expand a bit on what our plans are. So the steel strategy will be developed and delivered in partnership with the steel sector and the trade unions, of course, and it will work in lockstep with the government's industrial strategy. Our intention is to increase our UK capabilities so we can create a more vibrant, competitive steel sector. This will turn around the situation we inherited, where underinvestment has resulted in dated infrastructure. And I just want to emphasise that, and the point that my honourable friend from Stockton North, who knows so much about the steel industry, made about the efficiency and the economy of the new technologies, and why blast furnaces have struggled so much to make any money for the businesses that own them in this country. British Steel's blast furnaces were built in 1938, one of them, and 1954, the other one. And both the blast furnaces at Port Talbot were built in the 1950s, and they have become incredibly unproductive because they haven't been invested in, and the new technologies simply are more productive, and if we don't keep up with what the rest of the world are doing on a simple basis of the market, we won't be able to compete. So we inherited an industry on the brink, but we nevertheless, when we came into the government, negotiated within only 10 weeks a better deal with Tata, with better safeguards for workers, and with more money being invested into their future. And our £2.5 billion fund for steel will ensure that we have a steel industry for the future. The government's ambition is to ramp up investment, strengthen our supply chains, and create more well-paid jobs in the places where they are needed. And we talk of primary steel, and of course, with the help of all the experts that we have, we will be reviewing the viability of technologies for the production of primary steel, including direct reduced iron.
Should you give way?
I will give way.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. She's just said she will review the options. Within the steel strategy coming up, and this I'm hoping is a binary yes-no question, Is there a ministerial direction for that strategy to include a commitment to virgin steel production in the United Kingdom?
Fairly clear, and we have been in opposition. We want to produce primary steel in this country. This government has got us to a point where that is almost impossible without huge investment. We are supplying £2.5 billion of investment, and we are looking quite rightly at what is the best way to spend that money to create a viable steel future for this country. So we are looking at direct reduced iron, which is something the government previously didn't do as part of our steel strategy. The UK's ambition is to ramp up investment, and we also, many members, I should reflect, talked about the need for us to procure British steel in this country. We are in a situation now where 95% of the steel bought for infrastructure, if that type of steel is made in the UK, 95% of procurement from the UK government uses British steel. The issue is we don't produce all of the different types and right types of steel, and we need to make sure we're using the Procurement Act as much as we can to drive economic growth on steel. And just to give an example, and this is where I think the honourable member who brought the debate, I think we disagree in terms of whether or not the green agenda, as it were, can actually drive up jobs. We think it can drive up jobs and growth. And just to give an example, there's a Korean company, SIA, it's building a factory in Teesside at the moment, and it's going to build monopiles, which are the kind of big structures that go into the ocean and anchor the wind turbines. Now, they are building currently that structure with 30,000 tonnes of steel made from British steel. We want to get to a point where we are building these kinds of factories in this country, but we're also then using British steel where we can to actually make the infrastructure. At the moment in this country, we don't have a factory that makes the turbines on the scale that we need in floating offshore wind. But my point is that SIA is building that factory because they have an agreement with RWE, who are going to be running the turbines that they're building in the future. So that green job development into wind and renewable energy is driving an ability for us to build a factory in Teesside, create hundreds of jobs to build those monopiles, and we're using British steel. And that's the kind of future we want to see through the steel strategy, where we're looking at what are those opportunities to bring new steel incumbents into this country, to bring new steel companies into this country, and to find the ways to drive up production in this country. There were issues mentioned in the debate about what's holding us back, and I think I should address those. China and excess capacity is a huge issue, and we shouldn't underplay that. China is now the biggest steel producer in the world, and their unfair subsidies have led to massive steel overproduction, which fuels global overcapacity and drives down prices. And that's a global issue with local consequences here in the UK. It makes profitable steel production here in the UK much harder. And this is a key global situation that is helping shape our future steel strategy. And we will need, through things like the CBAM, to be tackling that problem and making sure we're working with a level playing field. Energy prices were mentioned by many members, and for too long we know British energy intensive industries, including the steel sector, have been held back by high electricity costs. Again, I disagree with the member who brought the debate. The electricity price is set by global gas prices, and it's our dependence on fossil fuels that is the problem, and the fact that in this country we didn't mitigate for that situation at all. So when we had the war in Ukraine and all the prices shot up, we were not in a position to be, we were in a worse position than many countries around the world. the British industry supercharger, which the member for Brigg and Immingham mentioned that the previous government developed, will bring down electricity costs for the UK's most energy-intensive industries, but we know that we need to go further because it only brings down 60% of costs, and we're still in a situation where there's a disparity. We believe that in an unstable world, homegrown, cheap, green energy is the future, and that is what is going to drive down prices, and that is what is going to reduce our exposure to that volatile fossil fuel market and protect bill payers and strengthen our energy independence. That is fundamentally what we believe will bring down costs in the long term. And then members mentioned decarbonisation and the sort of challenges of that. Now, Tata and British Steel's plans to invest in electric arc furnaces are driven by market conditions and the desire to reduce their carbon footprint. Customers want greener steel. The UK is going to have a CBAM. If we were producing with blast furnaces steel in the UK, we would be massively inhibited because the EU is bringing in a CBAM, which would mean the cost would be much higher for us to export into the EU. So we have to deal with the world as we find it. And again, I think that's where we would disagree with the honourable member. We can't look back to the past and try and recreate that. We have to deal with the world as we find it. And that means that we have to be moving towards these more efficient and more green energies. In the EU, where 78% of our steel exports went as well, which is worth pointing out in 2023, they are bringing in their carbon border adjustment mechanism in 2027. So we rely on the EU to export a lot of the steel we produce, and we will be at a massive disadvantage if we carry on producing steel from blast furnaces. We've committed as well to a UK carbon border adjustment mechanism, which will give UK businesses the confidence that when they invest in decarbonisation and electrification, they won't be at a disadvantage, and I think that's really important to say. In terms of other issues that honourable members mentioned, I should touch on Scunthorpe, because obviously that is front of mind for everybody. Nobody wants to see any job losses. Everybody wants to see the steel industry thrive, and through our strategy, that's what we want to do. I can't, for commercially confidential reasons, which I'm sure the honourable members understand, talk about the conversations that we are having with the owners, but can I reassure members that we are having conversations all the time, that we are working unbelievably hard to try and get a solution to Scunthorpe and to try and give that certainty that the honourable member from Briggs and Immingham talked about, which I know is the instability of the current situation. I completely understand, and all I can say to him is that we are doing all we can to work with the company on what the future will be. But I will give way.
Martin Vickers.
We share the desire to see a thriving steel industry. The Minister has mentioned on a couple of occasions in her reply about wanting to halt the decline and the production of the steel strategy in the spring. Can she give any sort of assurance that there would be no job losses at Scunthorpe until the strategy is produced and we can then work together to plan the way forward?
Sarah Jones.
Can I thank him for his intervention? And I think he will understand that I am not in a position to define what commercial companies do, and while we are trying to do what we can, I cannot do anything other than say we are working incredibly hard with the owners to make sure we get to a point that we want to get to. The honourable member for Strangford mentioned Holland and Wolf, and of course the same situation is true there. We are working hard to understand what the situation is and hoping for a resolution relatively soon on that. Yes.
Jim Shannon.
Generous and kind enough to let us know what the situation is today and what the hopefully progression will be for the next few weeks. If you don't mind, thank you.
Obviously, the process of selling the company is going through. It's a market situation. It's being dealt with in that way. Government is not providing funding or anything like that at this point. So we're allowing that process to take its course. But we are obviously talking to all parties to do what we can to make sure we have the right outcome. I've been talking to politicians from all 4 of the Harland and Wolff sites, as you would imagine. And again, there's uncertainty in each of those areas, whether it's in Scotland or Devon or Belfast. And we're working hard to make sure we get the right outcome there. In my closing remarks, Mrs Harris, the inheritance that this government took on for steel, not to mention the wider economy from the previous government, was nothing short of a travesty. Over a decade of lurching from crisis to crisis with no clear plan to safeguard the future of a competitive domestic steel industry. And this government is determined to change that, making the steel industry in this country fit for the future, so it's not left behind in a decarbonised world. The government is on the side of Britain's thousands of steel workers, and of course we haven't talked about the other parts of the country where we also have steel production. Martha Gaglia, who are in Sheffield, have announced just a couple of weeks ago that they are investing £50 million in a new electric arc furnace in Sheffield. So we do have incumbents here in the UK that are doing well. But this government is determined to ensure the future of British steel. We are on the side of Britain's thousands of steel workers. We are working closely with our trade unions, with experts and with others to develop that steel strategy. We believe that steel will forge our future and not just our past. And I look forward to working with all honourable members in this place to develop a steel strategy that sets us up for the next 10, 15, 20 years to come.
Richard Tice to wind up.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for this, and thank you to all of the honourable members for their contributions and to the Minister for her closing remarks. And it does seem to me that there is a sense of unity about the ambition. We have to protect our critically important steel industry in the United Kingdom. And I think that the government, frankly, is probably correct that they've been handed a bit of a hospital pass on this vital issue, and I think they understand that. The truth is, though, Madam Chair, I'm an impatient guy, and so I won't resile from asking the Minister and the Department from moving at incredible pace to secure the industry, to secure the jobs, and as the honourable member mentioned, to reduce the uncertainty. Because what this debate has enabled us all to do is to highlight the risks ahead of us. We cannot be here in a year's time where Jingye have said, can't be done, we've got to shut the blast furnace, it's going to shut, and the government's not ready for that. And I think that's what this does. It highlights the serious risks out there. And obviously I understand she can't share commercial conversations, they're clearly going on. But this is what we must be prepared for. You know, I've asked for a commitment, and I believe that the best way to secure that commitment in Scunthorpe is to have some form of commercial stake. And where I think we differ is that there is a confidence within the government, and the Honourable Member for Stockton North referred to this specifically, that the electric arc furnaces will be attractive, will be commercially viable to Tata and to Jingye. But there's a serious risk that they're not. And the reason that, of course, they are much more viable in the United States, as the Honourable Member referred to, is because their electricity price is between a quarter and a third of ours. And the reason for that is completely the opposite from what I believe the Minister said. It's because they have cheap gas, their own gas, shale gas, that allows them to produce that cheap electricity. So we've identified the risks. We share many of the same ambitions. We differ on certain issues. But I think it is absolutely critical that the government loses no time at all push us forward hard. I'm encouraged by the ambition to increase capability, the ambition to ramp up investment. But we have to understand, I don't see how we can get more investment if we can't get the electricity prices down. That is the critical objective, and the government has that responsibility. Madam Chair, thank you so much.
The question is that this House has considered the steel industry. As many are of that opinion, say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order, order.